Welcome back with a smiling face. Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. Whispers of Betrayal. Episode 2. Chapter 9. Macy made sandwiches for the kids' lunch, still silently debating. Having someone she could trust to watch the children would definitely be an advantage. Her list of reliable babysitters was extremely short and all of them were in Paris. But did she dare open herself up to the Dalair family drama that was sure to ensue? Augustus was bad enough, but what would she do once she faced March and Julius? Suddenly her phone rang. For a moment she was afraid it was Rose. Very few people had her number after all. After seeing the caller ID, Macy relaxed. She picked it up without further hesitation. "Hello Sil, what's up? I'm so sorry to be bothering you at home, but there's a problem with the new installation." Macy pursed her lips together, saying, "Are you sure you need me? I mean, I have the kids and I'd rather not drag them into the middle of a construction area. What if I send my assistant? She can babysit while you help me." Macy hesitated. "Is your assistant responsible?" "Yes. Yes. Of course." "Okay." 20 minutes later there was a knock at the door. Macy answered to see a young lady no more than 25 dressed in a rather short skirt, considering she was meant to be assistant curator. Still, who was she to judge? Macy had met a number of characters since starting her career. "Hello, are you Teresa?" "Yep." The woman looked bored. "Won't you come in?" Macy led her to the living room where the kids ate their lunch at the coffee table. "This is Arya and Kaden. They're finishing their lunch now, so they shouldn't be any problem until I come back." "Sure. Okay. Arya, Kaden, be good until I come back." "Okay mommy." Still nervous, Macy headed out. It was only a short drive to the gallery. Hopefully the installation wouldn't take long and she would be home soon. Once Macy was gone, the newly appointed babysitter sat down with a huff. Babysitting Rugrats was not her idea of a good time, and certainly not something she signed up for when she applied to be an assistant curator. She had plans to surround herself with famous artists and hopefully catch their eye. Taking out her phone, she immediately zoned out as she browsed websites. Arya and Kaden finished their lunch and colored a bit longer as they observed their inattentive babysitter. Trading silent looks, they eventually stood. "Excuse me, Miss Babysitter, we're going to take a nap now," Arya declared. "Fine. Whatever." Satisfied, the twins made their way towards the hall that led to the bedrooms. They paused, looking back to see their babysitter absorbed in her phone. With a nod they turned and scurried to the front door. Slipping on shoes, they quietly opened the door and stepped outside. Hurrying to the sidewalk, Arya paused and asked, "Did you get the information from Auntie's phone?" Kaden nodded. "I got Uncle and Daddy's phone numbers and their work numbers too. I looked it up on Mommy's computer. They work at the Dalair office downtown." "So how are we going to get there?" Arya asked. "Subway." "The what?" "You mean the metro. Here they call it a subway," Kaden shrugged. "Americans are weird," Arya sighed. Hand in hand with her brother they walked down the street. Kaden seemed to know where he was going, and a 5-minute walk later they reached stairs leading underground. They traveled the metro many times with their mother and were a little apprehensive that they didn't have her metro card as they approached the turnstiles. They walked underneath them without issue and hurried on. Kaden paused at the map to confirm their train before pulling his sister onto one. Arya happily seated herself on a bench and Kaden crawled up beside her. The pair held hands as the train pulled away from the station. Though they received several curious glances, no one bothered the pair. They sat silently observing the people around them until the gentle rock of the train lulled them to sleep. A sudden jolt as the train came to a stop woke the pair. They took in their surroundings with a note of surprise before remembering their mission. Neither was particularly panicked. "Are we almost there?" Arya suddenly asked. "I'm not sure," Cade answered. "Everything looks the same." Normally falling asleep on the metro wasn't an issue because their mother stayed awake watching for their stop. Without her they simply had no idea how long they had slept, how many stops they passed, or even if they missed their destination. "What should we do?" "Let's get off and find a map." Arya followed her brother off the train. This station was much more crowded than the last and they had to scurry out of the way of the other commuters. There were several in business suits which gave Cadden some semblance they hadn't missed their stop. Yet everyone was in such a hurry which made it difficult to ask questions. This was a sharp contrast to the French commuters they were used to. After several moments the train departed and they were still not sure of their location. "Maybe we should ask Le Policier for directions," Arya suggested. "They might take us to a station and have Mommy pick us up there," Cadden said. "Right. That would defeat the whole purpose of their plan." As they fell into silent debate, a new sound attracted them to a corner where a rather lanky African-American played the saxophone. His clothing was haggard and faded, but his instrument glistened, indicating it was well cared for. Though he preferred Beethoven, Cadden appreciated all music. In fact, they knew a street performer in Paris who often played the jazz. "Look, Cadden," Arya pointed to a keyboard that had been set up on top of its case resting on the ground. "Do you suppose he'll play that next?" Cadden wasn't sure. At the man's feet was his saxophone case. Inside was money tossed by the crowd, but it added up to a paltry sum. Perhaps he was meant to have a friend to perform alongside of him. "Cadden, you should play with him," Arya reached the same conclusion. "Then maybe he'll tell us how to get to Daddy's work." Cadden considered the logic before nodding. It was worth a shot. Besides, he sometimes played with their friend when they met him on the street. The crowd usually warmed up once the 5-year-old joined the performance. Franklin finished his last song with a flourish. He glanced down at the case with a grimace. Playing in the subway started on a whim and as a social experiment. He tested a number of music genres to see if there was a difference in how much money he earned. So far his results were inconclusive. He intentionally dressed in thrift store finds to play the part of a street performer. Franklin was actually classically trained and a much sought-after concert pianist and orchestral saxophone player. He was employed as a music instructor at the most prestigious educational facilities, although he had the clout to pick and choose the students he directly tutored. If the people rushing by him now knew that, would they stop to listen? Lost in thought, he didn't see the two small forms as they moved closer. He didn't stir until he heard someone run their fingers down the keyboard, creating a cascading sound that begged for attention. Franklin was jolted back to reality and turned to see a young boy kneeling at the keyboard. Grinning, the boy's green eyes shined with amusement at his surprise. Maintaining eye contact, he began to play Cheek to Cheek by Louis Armstrong and Ella Fitzgerald. Franklin's astonishment turned to admiration for the boy's playing. His skill was apparent. After a moment, Franklin joined him with the saxophone. Not only was the boy's playing excellent, but it was filled with exuberant emotion and true passion for the music that quickly garnered them a crowd. Soon dollars floated into the case where it once only held a few coins. Once the song ended, Franklin challenged him by playing the opening to Love by Nat King Cole. Without hesitation, the boy answered the challenge by playing along. Despite his young age, he seemed to be an encyclopedia of music. As they played, Franklin noticed the redhead girl standing close by, smiling at the boy. He wondered if they were related. Once they finished, the boy continued into the next song. The opening bars were simple and Franklin quickly recognized it: What a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong. The boy's playing was fantastic, but Franklin wasn't prepared for the girl to start singing in a clear, charming voice. He didn't recover from his shock until the second verse and finally joined in with his saxophone. I see trees of green red roses too, I see them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright blessed day, the dark sacred night, and I think to myself what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow so pretty in the sky are also on the faces of people going by. I see friends shaking hands saying how do you do, they're really saying I love you. I hear babies cry, I watch them grow, they'll learn much more than I'll ever know, and I think to myself what a wonderful world. Yes, I think to myself what a wonderful world. Ooh, yes. The boy finished with a few soft notes and suddenly the entire station resounded with applause. Franklin looked down to see his saxophone case filled with cash. The boy stood taking the little girl's hand. They bowed to the crowd together amid the applause. Slowly the crowd dissipated, leaving the trio of musicians alone. That was something else, little man, Franklin grinned. And you too, little miss? Cadden shrugged and his sister said, thank you, mister. You are almost as good as Elias. We play with him all the time. Ah, so you've done this before, Franklin said as he carefully placed his saxophone in his case after gathering up the cash. He would donate it to his favorite charity, All Kids Need Music, like usual. Cadden nodded, helping to store the keyboard in its case. Franklin watched the boy do it with practiced ease. It was clear he had done it many times before. He wondered if the other street performer also had a keyboard for the boy to play. So what brings you two here? Franklin asked, keeping an ear out for panicked parents. We're on our way to see Daddy, the girl answered. Wait. What? Where's your mom? She had work, but we didn't like our babysitters, so we decided to go see Daddy instead. So, neither of your parents know you are here? The pair shook their heads. Okay, we should probably call them. Franklin took out his iPhone. Do you know their numbers? The pair shared a look before shaking their heads. If they told him their mother's phone number, she would rush over and drag them home. On the other hand, they weren't supposed to know their fathers, and it would be suspicious for them to tell their new friend. What about your address? Do you know where you live? More head shakes. Franklin bit back his irritation. Were parents not responsible anymore? Did they not know about teaching their kids the importance of contact information? So, where does your father work? Dalair Plaza, 41 Nassau Street, Cadden answered easily. Franklin blinked surprise. If the boy could rattle off such an address so easily, then why didn't he know his home address? The whole situation was extremely bizarre, but at least now he had a place to take them. Well, good news. You're only a hop, skip and a jump away. Come on. Franklin hefted his music cases and led the kids back to the tracks. They willingly followed him as he stepped on the next train. Climbing onto the bench, they sat holding hands. Franklin watched them, trying to figure them out. Neither looked panicked or afraid as he would expect from a pair of lost children. The boy in particular observed their surroundings with a detached air, while his sister openly scrutinized those around them. They reached their stop and Franklin led them up to the street. They walked several blocks, taking almost 15 minutes to reach the entrance of a tall high-rise due to the children's short legs, though neither complained about the rather long march through the crowded streets. Franklin grimaced when he saw the commanding structure that was their destination. He wasn't part of the business world, so the Dalair name meant nothing to him, but he recognized a substantial building when he saw one. Are you sure your father works here? Yep. Franklin gave them a concerned look, still harboring reservations despite their insistence. Thank you, Mr. What's your name? The girl suddenly asked. Franklin. Oh. Thank you, Mr. Franklin, she happily said as the pair pushed their way through the revolving doors and entered the intimidating building without hesitation. Franklin hesitated, but the kids walked in with such confidence he had no reason to suspect they didn't know where they were going. It was clear they were not ordinary 5-year-olds. Now that they were inside, he was assured they would be taken care of at least. Still nervous, Franklin walked back to the subway. Much later he'd come to regret not getting the boy's name. There was no doubt he was a musical progeny. Completely forgetting their benefactor, Arya and Caden marched up to the front desk. Finally they were at their goal. Once they were able to speak with their grandfather, they would be able to see their daddy finally after years of waiting. Though their mother never mentioned their father, they knew he had to exist, so they asked their grandfather about him instead. Ever since he told them about their parents' past, they had been eager to meet the father they had never known. "Excuse me," Arya called when the receptionist didn't acknowledge them. After a moment she stood and leaned over to see the pair. Her brow furrowed, making her narrow face even more unattractive. They weren't particularly impressed with her observational skills either, as they had to struggle for her attention. "We're here to see Grandpa Gus," Arya announced. "Grandpa Gus," the receptionist repeated. "You mean Augustus Dalair?" "Yep. He's our grandpa." "Aha. Mr. Dalair has only one grandson and no one sees him without an appointment. So shoo. Or I'll call the police." The receptionist disappeared from their view. Upset at her dismissal, they retreated to the waiting area with large comfortable chairs and even a small nook with a coffee and espresso machines. Arya looked to her brother. "So what do we do now?" Caden scrunched his face as he thought about it. They hadn't expected such an immediate rejection. At the very least, he thought the receptionist should have called their grandfather. Even if their grandfather was busy, he would have sent Stephen to help them. While her brother considered their options, Arya noticed a man in a finely tailored suit. He was practically screaming into his phone about how insulted he was and how he would never do business with the Dalairs again. But what really caught her attention was the fact he said it all in German. "Maybe we should help Daddy with his work," Arya said. "Maybe then he'll want to spend time with us." "How?" Caden asked. "We don't know anything about his work." "Watch," Arya smirked before skipping up to intercept the man on the phone just as he put it away and reached the door. She didn't hesitate to greet him. "Hello, Hare. We Jets." Chapter 10. Julius sat at his desk slowly paging through the photo album his father gave him. He couldn't stop staring at the images of Macy and the babies. Guilt gnawed at him every minute. He should have been there. Macy should never have gone through her pregnancy alone. He should have listened to her, paid attention. He hadn't even known she wanted to go back to school. "Julius, Jules, Jules." He jerked to attention at his brother's entreats. March watched him with concern. Ever since they left their father's office, Julius paged through the album over and over again. It was clear his brother's thoughts were spiraling in guilt and regrets. "I know what you're thinking, but maybe this is a good thing." "How is this good?" "You've been worried about Macy for 6 years, not knowing what happened to her, if she was okay," March said. "Now you know." Julius stared at his brother, letting the words slowly sink in. "I'm not saying what Dad did was right, but if he's been taking care of them, then you know they've been given the best care." Julius sighed. March was right. The pictures made it clear the hospital boasted top-notch facilities. Their father would not have been satisfied with anything less, not with their mother's miscarriage hanging in his mind, and especially not after the complications Rose suffered. Ensuring Macy's pregnancy and the twins' birth was carefully monitored would have been his #1 priority. Macy hadn't been alone. Though he still didn't know the identity of the raven-haired woman, it was clear she was a friend and had been there for Macy through it all. None of that alleviated his sense of guilt and remorse, but there was some comfort in that knowledge. March took an uneasy breath seeing his brother relax even slightly. He still couldn't believe their father hadn't told them about Macy or the kids. Augustus had always felt indebted to Macy's father, Carl Grayson, the man who saved his life, and because of that he was extremely protective of her, treating her like a beloved daughter even before her marriage to Julius. He certainly would have sided with her even against his own sons whether or not she had been pregnant with his grandchildren. "Hello, am I interrupting?" They looked up to see Rose hesitantly enter. March immediately smiled, engulfing her in a hug. It was unusual for her to visit him at work, though he was always pleased to see her. Rose was sensible and never forgot her station as his wife. Sometimes he wished she would step out a little more rather than going with the flow. "Hello, love," March kissed her temple. "You know you are never interrupting. What brings you here?" "Well, I just got back from visiting Macy and the kids." "What?" Both brothers stared at her in shock. "How did you even know where to find them?" March asked. "Well, you mentioned last night your father put them up in a villa," Rose said. "I didn't think he would put them out in the country. So I went looking at his properties in the city." March was speechless. Rose was a real estate agent and had been in charge of acquiring many of their father's properties over the years, so she would have intimate knowledge of each. It hadn't occurred to them he would place Macy and the kids in one, but it made perfect sense. Augustus certainly wouldn't put them in a hotel. The fact Rose had gone searching for them was definitely one of the boldest moves she ever made. "They are in Soho," Rose answered their unasked question. Julius felt himself trembling. They were so close, not even a half-hour's drive away. Hesitantly he asked, "How did they look?" Rose gave him a sympathetic look before taking out her phone. She handed it to March, who looked down at it with a smile before passing it to his brother without a word. On the screen was a picture of the twins kneeling beside a table with coloring books strewn across it. Arya had her hair in pigtails and wore a dress with striped sleeves matching her skirt. On the front of her top was a zebra with balloons. Beside her, Caden also wore a black shirt displaying the Batman signal. Both of the twins had a dusting of freckles over their noses that were definitely inherited from their mother. Even with the boy's green eyes, his resemblance to his father was uncanny, just as the girl resembled their mother. Julius couldn't look away as he memorized their every feature. "Buy best-selling books online. They seem perfectly happy and healthy to me," Rose said. "I'm surprised Macy let you take a picture," March commented. "Just what is that supposed to mean?" Rose demanded. "Macy invited me in. She even introduced me as their aunt. They got all excited when I told them about Jude. Arya said I should take a picture so he could see them without skipping school." "You told them about Jude?" "Of course. They even asked to see his picture," Rose said. "I showed them one of you two together. They were really happy to learn they had so many family members. Look, they even colored me pictures." Rose took out the colored pages for them to look at. Julius finally tore his gaze from the photo to look at the pictures. He smiled seeing their childish scrawls, "To Auntie Rose, love Arya, and love Caden." "So, about family," March hesitated. "Do they know?" Julius stiffened, glancing up at him. Did his children know they had a father? Did they want to meet him? Would they even give him a chance after he missed so much of their life? I wanted to ask, but I just couldn't do it in front of the kids." Rose gave him a sympathetic smile. "I really don't know how much Macy told them. I'm sorry." "That's all right," Julius tried to sound convincing. "I already missed so much. I don't have the right to be called Dad." They are 5 years old, Julius, Rose gently admonished. Yes, you've missed 5 years, but they have a lot of growing to do. You can still have years with them, as their father. If Macy lets me, Julius sucked in a breath. Rose wasn't wrong. In the grand scheme of things 5 years was not long, but it didn't alleviate his guilt in the slightest. He hadn't been there for his wife when she needed him, and he hadn't been there for his children. Would any of them even want him in their lives? His finger traced the colored pictures as he let his thoughts circle. It seemed he couldn't escape from the depressing spiral. If you want, you can keep those, Rose offered. No, you keep them. They colored them for you, Julius hesitantly handed over the pictures. But could you send me the photo? Of course, Rose smiled, accepting the pictures and her phone back. A few taps and she not only sent the photo to Julius but also March's phones. She hoped it would be the first of many. Well, I should probably go. I kind of rushed out of the office as soon as I narrowed down the properties. Yeah, we have a meeting soon, March nodded, glancing at his watch. Actually, it should have started 10 minutes ago. Julius, did they call you he was here? No, Julius shook his head, storing the album safely in his desk. And no calls, he was running late either. We should check the reception desk. He stood, grabbing his jacket. They moved to the door as it burst open to reveal Catherine. She spared no glance to March or Rose, focusing solely on the man she came to see. Julius. It's time for our date. Our what? Julius glared at her. Since when did he make any plans with her? No matter how he racked his mind, he recalled no conversation about setting aside lunch for her. In fact, since he saw Macy and the children at the party, he hadn't spoken one word to Catherine or spared her any thought. We have a lunch date, silly. No. We don't, Julius said, trying to control his anger. I have a business meeting today. Why would you want to meet that stuffy, old man anyway? Catherine scoffed. He didn't even speak English. I mean, hello, this is America. What? Julius snapped. What did you do? Well, I told him he'd have to wait his turn. Do you realize you might have just ruined a multimillion-dollar deal? What? Well, how was I supposed to know? Damn it. Julius didn't wait for her explanation. He pushed past her with March and Rose following close behind. Catherine trailed after them like a wounded puppy. They rushed to the reception desk on the executive floor, only to be informed their guest had departed after a confrontation with Catherine. They hurried into the elevator and took it to the first-floor lobby, hoping they could still catch him. Julius, shut up. I don't want to hear it. Catherine bit her lip. How was she supposed to know he was an important guest? She just wanted to spend time with Julius. He had been growing more distant with her and she needed to rein him in. The wedding was only 6 months away and she had to make sure rumors put them together, or she would never get him to the altar. He would have to marry her just to save face. The last thing he would want was the bad press of leaving a woman at the altar. They rushed off the elevator and headed to the front desk when laughter brought them to a sudden halt. Their gazes went to the waiting area to see a man in his mid-40s in a finely tailored suit seated in one of the chairs. His hair was dark and neatly styled despite thinning as he aged. Seated comfortably on his lap was a content Arya. Sitting on the coffee table in front of them, swinging his legs, was a slightly bored Catan. As surprising as it was to see the twins, it was even more surprising when Arya spoke perfect German. Was hat wir beine und ist immer Reisbereit. Prinzessin Kenich nickt. Was ist es? Ein Elefant. Arya giggled and earned a hearty laugh from the gentleman currently entertaining her. Or perhaps it was the other way around. Cadden snickered at the over-the-top response. He didn't think his sister's joke was that funny, but he also wasn't paying close attention as he had the job of playing lookout. His eyes kept watch on the front door, waiting for a familiar face to appear. Julius stared, not believing the kids were really in front of him now. His twins, his babies. But his astonishment came with a thorn of jealousy as the stranger in front of him was enjoying their attention when he had not been able to hold them himself. Arya giggled before catching her brother's silent signal. Her eyes glanced over the man's shoulder to see their grandfather enter. She didn't have to fake delight as she hopped off the businessman's lap. "Grandpa Gus." Augustus entered with Stephen in tow. His lunch meeting had gone well and he was in a good mood. When Arya's excited voice suddenly called his name, he came to a surprised halt as not just her but Cadden ran up to him. He dropped to his knee, immediately embracing the pair. "There you are, you rascals." Augustus chuckled. "Look Grandpa, we made a new friend," Arya introduced. "Herr Leon. Das ist mein Opa Gus." "So I gathered, Prinzessin." Leon laughed, his English heavily accented. "Hello Herr Dalair." "Hello." Augustus shook his hand with some confusion as to how his grandchildren met the man who should have been ensconced and in discussion with his sons. "Yes, it seems there was a miscommunication with my appointment." Leon cleared his throat, unwilling to describe the horrid conversation he had with the insufferable woman upstairs. "I wasn't able to make the meeting, but your grandchildren have been delightful company." "That is too bad, but if you have time now, I'm afraid not. However, I will not fly back home until Friday. Perhaps we can meet later." "Yes, of course." Augustus reached behind him and Stephen immediately placed a card in his hand. "Here is my business card with my direct line. I'll make sure Stephen keeps my schedule clear for you." "I look forward to it," Leon nodded. "Now I must be off. Auf Wiedersehen, kleine Prinzessin." "Auf Wiedersehen." Arya waved as he departed. Augustus maintained a smile until Leon left. His smile immediately faded and his expression became serious as he turned back to the twins. "All right you two, how did you get here?" "The metro," Arya answered without hesitation. "You mean the subway?" "Aha! Mommy had to work, but we didn't like our babysitters, so we decided to come and visit." "You mean you rode the subway all the way here by yourselves?" "No. We met Franklin halfway here. He brought us the rest of the way." "Who's Franklin?" "He plays saxophone in the subway station." "You met a homeless man in the subway and he brought you here?" "I don't think he is homeless," Cadden said, thinking back to the well-cared-for instruments and the new cell phone their guide possessed. "You realize your mother is probably out of her mind right now." Augustus shook his head, holding out his hand to Stephen, who placed his phone in it, already dialed and ringing. He only had to wait a moment before a panicked voice answered, "I can't talk now. I have to go." "Macy, before you hang up, it wouldn't have anything to do with a pair of adorable twins who happen to be standing in front of me, would it?" "They are with you?" "Thank God." "It seems they didn't like their babysitter and snuck away," Augustus said, choosing not to elaborate on details. There was time enough for that later when she wasn't panicked. "I'm at the gallery right now. Can they stay with you until I'm done?" "Of course. I have another hour before I can knock off work, then I'll take them home." "You can pick them up there." Augustus fell silent, listening to her response before saying goodbye and handing the phone back to Stephen. He gave the twins a serious look, saying, "Your mother wishes me to inform you both you are grounded for a week. No cartoons. No piano." He pointed to each in turn and their eyes widened in shock and horror. Augustus smirked at their obvious distress before he asked something that had been nagging him since he stepped into the building. "Now, why were you two sitting here in the lobby?" We told the lady at the desk we were here to see you, but she said we couldn't without an appointment, Arya explained, stumbling over the last word's pronunciation. Is that so? They nodded. I see. Stephen, take them to my office, Augustus instructed. With a nod, the assistants herded them toward a small elevator off to the side. It could only be used by those possessing authorized codes, and it offered a direct route to the executive floor. Augustus marched toward the reception desk, eyeing the name tag the woman manning it wore, saying, Miss Johnson. Yes, Mr. Dalair. She stood up immediately. Usually the Dalair patriarch ignored her presence. You see those children? Augustus nodded in their direction. She glanced at the pair following Stephen as he reached the elevator and ushered them on. They seemed vaguely familiar. Looking back to her boss, she nodded. Those are my grandkids, and if they ever show up here again and I'm not immediately informed, it will be your job. Augustus glared. All his earlier good nature was gone, replaced by a ruthless aura. The receptionist quailed. I don't care if I'm in a meeting or out to lunch. I expect a call the moment they enter the building or you're fired. Understood? Why, yes, sir. Good. Augustus turned, finally acknowledging his sons who witnessed it all. Hello, Rose dear. Dad? Rose stepped forward, giving him a peck on the cheek before retreating. I should get going. Augustus let her go, fixing his sons with a hard stare. Someone want to explain to me how my two sons with a combined 30+ years of business experience threw away the deal of the century that my darling grandchildren somehow managed to salvage? March and Julius shot each other looks, wondering how much to say. Knowing the situation was his fault, Julius finally spoke up. It's my mistake. I was distracted. Augustus's gaze narrowed, falling on Catherine, who smiled at his notice, hoping he would greet her as he had Rose, but her expression faded under the weight of his glare. He was well aware she often interrupted Julius's work, though she had no business in the office. Augustus never asked what happened in Julius's office during her visits, not wanting to know the extent of his son's infidelity. He was at least fairly confident his son never actually succumbed to her romantic advances. After a moment, Augustus finally spoke. Son, you better not waste the opportunity in front of you, or I will be sorely disappointed. I won't, Julius assured him. With a nod, Augustus left them to catch up to the twins. They had a lot of explaining to do. What in the world possessed them to worry their mother so? Chapter 11. Augustus stepped into his office to see Arya and Cadden seated comfortably on one of his couches. Stephen placed a plate of cookies in front of them and handed them each a juice bottle as the Dalair patriarch entered. Ever efficient, even Augustus had no idea how Stephen always managed to procure proper refreshments so quickly. He sat down across from the content pair, eyeing them carefully. They certainly didn't act like 5-year-olds who had just survived a harrowing experience. In fact, they seemed quite pleased with themselves. Augustus accepted the coffee Stephen offered while he considered his grandchildren. Despite their innocent looks, he couldn't treat them like normal kids. All right, you two want to tell me why you are really here? Arya and Cadden shared a look before Arya spoke up. We're here to start Phase 2. Phase 2? Of what? Our plan to get Mommy and Daddy back together, of course, Arya smiled as if it went without saying. Augustus couldn't stop the look of surprise that suddenly plastered his face as he sputtered into his coffee cup. Clearing his throat, he asked, You have a plan? Yes. Arya nodded. It was a plan almost a year in the making, one they had carefully considered ever since they first asked their grandfather to tell them about their father. Last night was Phase 1. Daddy finally saw us, so now he knows we're here. Now we have to start Phase 2. And just what is Phase 2? To spend time with him, silly. Daddy needs motivation to talk to Mommy, Arya said. He also needs to get to know us. And we need to get to know him too, Caden added. Like his sister, he was curious about the father they had yet to meet. As much as he wanted a father, it was important to be certain theirs was the right one for their mother. Their mother was the pinnacle of beauty and kindness, and Caden would not settle for anything less than the best for her. He could only hope his biological father was the perfect match for her, otherwise they would have to change their plans. That was the one point of contention between him and his sister, who simply assumed their father would be as perfect as their mother. And you both came up with this? Yes, Arya said. Daddy didn't try to see us at all last night. If he's too shy to come to us, then we have to go to him. Caden nodded in agreement. And Grandpa, you're not allowed to be mean to Daddy anymore. You have to be nice. Augustus choked, trying to finish his coffee while Stephen hid a smile. After a moment, the Dalair patriarch said, "Now hold on, no Grandpa." Arya held up a hand and pointed at him. Daddy needs encouragement, so you have to be nice. Caden solemnly nodded. Augustus fell silent as he faced his serious-minded grandchildren. From a very early age he knew something was different about the pair. While Arya said her first word before the age of 1, Caden remained silent until almost 3, when he finally began speaking in full sentences. From the time he could crawl, Caden's favorite toy was a little child's play piano. Though it had only 5 keys, he often tapped simple tunes that were instantly recognizable as nursery rhymes. He kept to himself while Arya was far more gregarious. However, Augustus noticed her attitude and approach changed drastically depending on the people she was introduced to. On a number of occasions he saw her easily manipulate situations to her benefit, especially with adults who naturally underestimated her because she was so young. It was clear to him the pair possessed intelligence far exceeding normal children. His suspicions were confirmed as soon as Caden was given a proper keyboard. Once Macy taught him the basics on how to play, there was no stopping him. Augustus often wondered if Macy was aware of her children's unique intelligence. Certainly she had to have an inkling, given she raised them. On the other hand, mothers tended to see their children through rose-colored glasses. In addition, the kids seemed intent on hiding their intelligence to avoid standing out. Their grades tended to be only slightly higher than average. In addition, Caden shied from showing his full skills to large groups, keeping his piano playing only for familiar ears unless he was playing on the street with the performer they liked. "So what do you plan to do?" "We're going to play hide and seek, but you're not going to find us," Arya said. "That way we can spend time with Daddy. After that we can talk about Phase 3 and 4. "Ah, I see." Augustus nodded, his eyes glinted mischievously. "If I might make a suggestion." Julius silently fumed as he listened to his children explain how they arrived to the office building only to be rejected at the door because no one knew their connection to him. He no longer cared about their failed meeting with Leon or the fact the deal had been salvaged by Arya's intervention. All he cared about was finding the person responsible for dismissing his children, but even retribution was denied him when his father handled the receptionist. "Such a spiteful old man," Catherine grumbled. "Come on baby, let's go on that date." She clutched his arm, but Julius jerked away, glaring at her, demanding, "What are you still doing here? This is an office building for people who work. Do you know anything about that?" Catherine's mouth opened and closed several times as she struggled to think of an answer. No one had ever expected her to work. Her parents treated her like a princess and insisted she not worry about money. She reached for him again, but he turned away, grabbing a phone off the receptionist's desk, and demanded security. A pair of security personnel in suits appeared moments later. "Throw this woman out." Julius gestured to Catherine. "She's barred from this building for life. If I see her here again, it will be your heads." "Yes, Mr. Dalair." The security personnel nodded, immediately grasping her arms and dragging toward the door. Julius. Wait. Julius. You can't. He turned away in disgust, heading toward the elevators. Only March gave Catherine a glance and smirked. It was about time his brother tossed her out. In fact, it was long overdue. The woman was shameless and had no sense of propriety. It suddenly felt a lot more like spring, and he couldn't wait to tell Rose the good news. Julius. Catherine called as she was dragged out and tossed onto the sidewalk. She stumbled and fell on her backside. Getting up quickly, she moved to re-enter, but the security personnel barred her from the doors. Do you have any idea who I am? I'll have your jobs for this. Her threats fell on deaf ears. The only people with more authority than Julius were his brother and father. Since neither was fond of her, they had no fear of the woman in front of them. They stood firm and refused her entry. Just you wait, Catherine declared before stomping off, completely unaware of paparazzi snapping photographs of the embarrassing scene. Julius. March called, jogging to catch up to his brother. Julius paused, slowly catching his breath, and tried to calm his racing heart. A migraine was beginning to form from the emotional roller coaster of the morning. His babies could have been abducted and he hadn't been there to protect them. Julius, it's okay, March said. How is it okay? Well, for starters, they are safe. Julius sighed. They were safe. His father had successfully absconded them to his office, where they would no doubt remain. Would he ever be able to spend time with them? Finally he spoke, yet. They are safe and somehow saved our European deal. March smirked, that they did. Who knew Arya could speak German? I thought Dad said they were living in Paris. Julius grunted. Just the memory of his daughter seated in someone else's lap irritated him. He wanted to be the one to hold her. I wonder, what? Julius stirred from his spiraling thoughts. Well, it's just, Macy and the kids have been living in Paris and Dad's been pushing to get a foothold in Europe. You don't suppose the reason why was to be able to stay closer to them, do you? Julius considered his brother's remark. Entering the European market made perfect business sense, but their father hadn't cared much about it for decades, so it was strange he would suddenly push for it. Yet knowing he had been watching over Macy and the kids, it started to make sense. 6 years of maintaining so much distance was probably trying the old man's patience. After all, he vowed he would not be deprived of his grandchildren. With new thoughts in his mind, Julius headed to his office, declining a lunch invite from March. Pouring himself a drink, Julius nearly collapsed into his chair. He ran his fingers through his hair, wondering if he should call his secretary for aspirin. Giggles interrupted his thoughts. Julius straightened, glancing around his office, but he seemed alone. Another giggle made him look at his desk. Easing his chair back, he peered under it to see 2 sets of giddy eyes staring at him. He opened his mouth to speak, but Arya quickly put her finger to her mouth, signing for quiet. A knock at the door made him sit up as Stephen stepped inside. I beg the intrusion, Mr. Dalair, but have you seen the little miss and master? Stephen asked. They are playing hide and seek and have hidden themselves quite well. Julius hesitated, glancing down before making a decision. No. No, I haven't. Stephen nodded and quickly departed before he accidentally broke his impassive expression with a smile and ruined the ruse. So far the twins' plan was going exactly the way they hoped. Julius hesitated before looking down at the adorable pair crouched under his desk. He grinned, asking, "He's gone. Do you two want to stay under there? I think you will be more comfortable out here with me. He won't come back unless I call for him." The twins shared a look before crawling out. Arya hopped onto her feet, bouncing so that her pigtails swung wildly. Cadden stood up more cautiously, glancing toward the door to be certain they were indeed alone. "Thank you, Mr. Arya smiled brightly. Julius's face twitched and he clenched his jaw before saying, Julius. Julius. Arya repeated with a child's careless pronunciation. Jules. Jules. That's what my brother calls me. You have a brother? Arya asked as if she were unaware. Yes. An older one. He was my hero growing up. Mommy's our hero. I'm Arya. It's nice to meet you. Arya held out a hand. A smile twitched his mouth. Julius gently shook it, though he would have preferred a hug. He would have also preferred she called him daddy, but not knowing if she knew their connection, he kept his desires to himself. Somehow he needed to learn what Macy told them about their father. He wouldn't blame her if she had said nothing, but he was desperate to be a part of their lives. Hopefully he could convince her to allow him to be. I'm Caden. Caden also shook his hand. Is your brother like you? Arya asked. For the most part. He used to pick on me when we were kids. That's not very nice. I thought you said he's your hero, Caden added to her sister's protest. Julius smirked before saying, well, I might have deserved it. I was an annoying little brother. Just like mine. Arya giggled at Caden, who scowled. She was only 3 minutes older, but she never passed up a moment to remind him. What do you do here? Caden asked, his somber gaze slowly taking in the office. Oh well, I'm a project VP. When people have an idea, they bring their idea and any research they've done to me. I go over it and then decide if it's something the company wants to invest in. Julius wasn't sure his answer made sense to the children. Wow, that's an important job, Caden said in awe. Thank you. Do you want to see how I do it? Yeah. Arya clapped her hands. Smiling, Julius pulled her into his lap, sitting her on one knee, then picked up Caden and set him on the other before scooting closer to the desk. Opening up his laptop, Julius called up the latest proposal to come through. It was a submission for an ad campaign. They had given him 3 options from which to choose. What's this? Arya asked, leaning against him while Caden leaned forward to study the screen. These are ad campaigns. I'm supposed to pick the best one. Hey! I like that one, Arya pointed to the first. It has the best colors. But the words are too small, Caden complained. How about this one? Julius highlighted the third option. The color isn't very bright. The words are better. So how about we send an email telling them to tweak the color on this one to be closer to the first option? Julius said, doing exactly what he suggested. There, now they will make adjustments. Just like that? Yep. Just like that. Is that all the work you have to do? For the moment. His schedule had been kept clear in case his meeting with Leon ran long. Now his afternoon was wide open. He could use the day to catch up on other work, but the desire to do so was low now that he had company. Then how about a joke? Arya suggested. You know a good one. What has 4 legs and is always ready to travel? I don't know. An elephant. Arya erupted into giggles, making Julius laugh. Without thinking, he leaned close and kissed her temple, making Arya giggle more. That tickles. Julius pulled back and Arya patted his cheek. Your face is all scratchy. Oh yeah, I forgot to shave this morning, Julius explained. He didn't add that the reason he forgot to shave was because of his plan to confront his father earlier for the truth about the twins. You forgot? That's so silly. I guess it is, Julius chuckled. You want to play a game? What kind of game? Let me show you. Julius reached for the laptop again. Chapter 12. Macy sighed, trying to marshal her courage. The car door opened and a hand reached in to help her out. She stared at it several moments before she placed her hand in it and stepped out to face Stephen. With a nod he gave her hand to the waiting Augustus. "You look beautiful, my dear." Macy gave him a wry look. Tonight she wore a dark blue gown similar in style to the green one of the night before. The material and texture were different but both hugged her figure. This one had rhinestones sewn into the hem and skirt, giving it added sparkle. It also had a high neck and covered her chest like first one, but this time the material was black lace showing a lot more skin but still modest enough for her sensibilities. Though she was not adept at complex hairstyles, she managed a French braid that helped tame her abundant curls. "Are you sure I need to be here?" Macy asked. "You know how much I hate these kinds of things. Now. You'll be debuting at the end of the week, so it's best to get everyone used to seeing you before then. Besides, I haven't had the privilege of a beautiful woman on my arm in decades. I also don't want to disrupt my grandchildren's plans." Augustus added internally, his mind going back to his meeting earlier in the day. "So, what do you think of your father?" Augustus asked once Stephen successfully retrieved the children after an hour with their father. They were in the garage headed toward a limo that would take them to the Dalair estate. Arya and Cadden walked on either side of their grandfather, each consumed with their own thoughts. Finally Arya spoke, looking up at Augustus for answers. "He's very nice, but he seems really sad." "Well, yes." Augustus nodded. "He's been missing your mother for a long time, so I imagine he would be very sad." "He really misses Mommy." "Yes. He does." "Then why did he chase her away?" Cadden asked. The question had been bothering him ever since their grandfather first told them about their father. "Well, adults don't always do things logically," Augustus said. "You know, I'm the one who first suggested they get married. I knew your mommy was in love with my son, but Julius, well, let's just say he was never very bright in matters of the heart. I thought if they married and spent more time together he would realize your mom's feelings and figure out his own, but that was probably the wrong approach." The twins nodded as they listened and waited for him to continue. "I guess he just wasn't ready. After your mom left, your dad finally started realizing what he had. He's spent 6 years trying to find her so he could tell her how he really feels." "What do you think, Cadden?" Arya asked, looking to her brother. As far as she was concerned, this confirmed her hope for their father, but she wanted to make sure her brother felt the same way before they proceeded. The plan would not work unless they both agreed. "I think it is worth giving him a second chance," Cadden nodded. "He does seem very sorry and Mommy's sad without him." "Okay. Then we proceed with Phase 3 and 4, Arya announced. "But we'll need your help, Grandpa." "And what do you need from me?" "For Phase 3 we need to get Mommy and Daddy together so they can talk," Arya said. "That means they need to be in the same place, but they can't know they will be in the same place," Cadden said. "It has to be a surprise." "That's right," Arya agreed. Augustus thought for a moment. It would be easy enough to arrange a family dinner and invite Macy along, but that seemed to go against the twins' idea. They wanted a more public setting where there would be a lot of guests mingling to allow their father the opportunity to approach Macy on his own. "What about Mr. Church's invitation for tonight?" Stephen suggested. Normally he remained the silent shadow, but he felt it was time to offer a suggestion since he handled Augustus's schedule. "Oh, right. What was that again?" "Apparently he purchased a new Picasso and wants to show it off," Stephen answered. "Ah, yes. That. Mommy doesn't like Picasso," Cadden said, thinking it was silly that they didn't know that. "But it would be a good excuse to ask her to attend with me," Augustus said. "After all, I don't know anything about art." Arya and Cadden shared a look as they considered the information before Arya asked, "And Daddy will definitely be there?" Yes. He and Church are old friends, Stephen carefully qualified, not sure how much he should tell one so young or if they would even understand adult issues. You don't sound sure, Cadden commented with a scowl. Adults talked down to them all the time thinking they didn't or were too young to understand. Well, they are drinking buddies, Stephen clarified and decided to tell the truth. Your father drinks when he is depressed. And he has been very depressed since your mother left. The twins nodded. They noticed their father smelled of alcohol when they went to see him. He even had a drink on the desk. Yet he hadn't touched it the entire time they were with him. While they were there he laughed and smiled too, so maybe what Stephen said was true and their daddy only drank when he was sad. Okay, Arya announced, Grandpa, you invite Mommy to see the Picasso so she and Daddy can meet each other. What about us? Cadden asked. We're not going, Arya said. THs is for grown ups. I mean, what is Mommy going to do with us? Cadden clarified. Mommy won't go if we don't have a babysitter, and I don't think she's going to trust the one from today. Oh, right. Arya's face fell. Their mother trusted very few people with their care, and she certainly wouldn't trust that woman again after they disappeared out from under her nose. That's not a problem, Augustus assured him. Your aunt and uncle can watch you. You mean Auntie Rose and Uncle March? That's right. I know they want to spend more time with you, and your mother definitely trusts them. Okay. Phase 3 is a go. Arya exclaimed, raising a fist. Once they achieved Phase 3, then they would be halfway to getting their parents back together. Unaware of her father-in-law's thoughts, Macy rolled her eyes at his seemingly careless comment. Nonetheless, she threaded her arm through his and accompanied him inside. She knew he was trying to introduce her to New York high society before the exhibit. He wanted her to be accepted, and it meant the world to her he was being so attentive to her and the kids. The doorman let them pass without requesting their invitation. Augustus was a notable figure wherever he went and never barred from entry. Anyone hosting an event hoped for his attendance to elevate the prestige of their gathering. Once inside, he led her around, stopping only when he found someone worthy to talk to. In this crowd that was few and far between, but he made the most of it to avoid attracting her suspicion. In truth, he wasn't very fond of the host. Frederick Church was an annoyingly small-minded man. He was so used to spending his parents' wealth he never learned how to build his own. Thus far his greatest accomplishment was becoming one Julius's acquaintances. Augustus would be pleased if Frederick encouraged Julius to do anything other than drink. It was a known fact Julius's drinking was worse on nights he was in Frederick's company, but tonight would be different. Augustus was confident his son would not waste this opportunity. Tonight's celebration was due to Frederick's purchase of a new Picasso currently displayed on the wall. Once again he was spending money rather than earning it. Augustus would never have considered attending such an event if it wasn't for his grandchildren's idea. Even now he couldn't help but chuckle at the audacity and conniving natures of his grandchildren. He wondered if Macy had any idea her perfect angels were actually such devious imps. Probably not. Convincing Macy to accompany him had been surprisingly difficult, but perhaps not that shocking. She was never one to put on airs, and social gatherings made her uncomfortable, bringing back unpleasant memories of the past. Though she was beautiful, Macy never saw herself in that light, and having a humble beginning, she lacked confidence among entitled elites. But that was the younger Macy. She was older, more mature, and more confident, having forged her own path much like her father. Augustus watched her growth and felt the difference in her even if she didn't. He wouldn't have asked her to come back if she wasn't ready. Yet she was a mother first, and just as Cadden predicted, she was paranoid after their disappearance. No amount of reassurance from the kids had an effect. It wasn't until Augustus suggested March and Rose could watch the twins that Macy even considered going to the party. She was nervous about forcing them to miss the gathering, but Augustus assured her they weren't planning on attending anyway and would enjoy spending time with the kids. Cadden and Arya enthusiastically agreed, eager to get to know the aunt and uncle they had only just met. Hemmed in from three sides, Macy finally agreed. Handing her a glass of champagne from a passing server, Augustus led her to where the Picasso was displayed for the night. Surprisingly, it wasn't a painting. Rather, it was a sketch. Bold lines traced a barely recognizable face in Picasso's signature style. Augustus's brow furrowed. "I'm afraid I don't understand why this was expensive enough to warrant a party," he said. "Well, I've been told I'm not the right person to ask about Picasso," Macy sighed, recalling her last conversation with Paul and a few other colleagues. "And why is that?" "Because he was a misogynistic pig who used women like tissues and had relations with underaged girls, and I find him disgusting." Augustus raised a brow at her answer. Cadden had warned his mother didn't like Picasso. Augustus hadn't realized she would have such a strong opinion. Was that the reason why? "I really don't care if he is considered the founder of the modern art movement. I don't think we should ignore the person behind the art, no matter how pivotal their contribution is considered." As someone with limited knowledge about art, Augustus didn't have an answer to that. He wasn't sure if he dared. One thing he knew from past experience was never to argue with a woman. Chapter 13. "Champagne, sir," a server offered as Julius entered. Shaking his head, Julius waved him off and headed to the bar to order his usual whiskey. He leaned on the counter with his drink in hand, but found he really wasn't interested in actually drinking it as he studied the attendees. It seemed like the usual crowd. Julius drank with most of them on one occasion or another, but he didn't feel like mingling tonight. He was more relaxed than he had been in years. His mind was clear, still reveling in the memory of the hour he spent with his children. Their giggles filled his ears and he longed to hold them again. Julius set down his drink, a slow smile softening his expression. If only the kids were here tonight, but this was not his father's crowd. It was unlikely Macy would attend without him, and without her the twins would definitely not make an appearance. And given the crowd, he wouldn't want them here anyway. There was no one here he wanted to introduce them to. "Julius. So glad you came," Frederick called, coming up to him and slapping his back in welcome. Frederick was a couple years younger with thick brown hair. Unlike Julius, who preferred a clean-shaved look, Frederick sported a goatee. Tonight his hair was slicked back and gelled. Even his goatee seemed greased. As always, he wore a limited edition suit, though there hardly seemed a need for it as Frederick never set foot in his family's business. Julius had to admit there was something attractive in the idea of turning over all responsibilities of running the family business to others and living off profits, but ultimately it would be boring. His father raised him with more ambition, and work was the one thing that kept his depression at bay, at least during the day. But things were different now. His mind filled with the images of Macy and the kids. Everything had changed. If he wanted to be a part of their lives, he couldn't afford to be hesitant. He had to talk to Macy, apologize and clear the air between them. Julius would get down on his knees and beg if that was what took to convince her how much he wanted to be a part of their lives again. The first chance he got, he would do just that. "It's good to see you." Frederick laughed. "Hey, you look different." "How do you mean?" "Well, you shaved." Julius blinked, then touched his face. The stubble that had lingered there for several days was indeed gone. He hated to admit it, but he had gotten lax about shaving over the past few months. One comment from Arya was enough to remind him he had to take better care of himself. "And you showered. Anything else?" Julius raised an eyebrow. Had he really fallen so far down? All he needed to do to impress was shower and shave? No wonder his brother had been so worried about him. No. I don't know, you just look happy. Julius grunted. But it was true. He was happy, happier than he had been in years. There was only one reason for this drastic change. He pictured them again and kept the image in his mind. You must have had a good day. Julius smiled as he recalled using his laptop to play games with Arya while Catelyn played on his phone. They even snapped a few pictures, just the three of them, which he suddenly had the urge to look at again. He forced himself not to reach for his phone, not wanting to share the moment with the likes of Frederick, who couldn't possibly understand. Frederick never once mentioned marriage or kids in all the time Julius knew him. In fact, Frederick avoided any conversation involving responsibility. Catherine must be something else. What? Julius frowned. Why bring her up? What do you mean? She's your fiancée. Who else could put a smile on your face? You lucky dog. She's got an impressive A*S. First of all, she's not my fiancée, Julius snapped, downing his drink in one go. Second, if you like her so much, you marry her. Frederick laughed, saying, No. I'd rather be like your old man. Why is that? He's, what, 65? He came here with a redhead half his age. I should ask him where he found her. She's hot. Julius scoffed, then froze. Did you say redhead? That's right. She's gorgeous. Frederick said, gesturing with his hands to make voluptuous curves. What a body! Definitely worth whatever your father paid. Julius slammed down his glass. His gaze became stone cold and dangerous as he fought the urge to punch his friend out. In a low voice he finally spoke, Don't talk about her like that. Oh, come on, don't be so serious. She's not your stepmom yet. Julius shoved Frederick aside and stormed off before he did something he would regret. His hands were shaking. It wasn't that Frederick was wrong. Macy was gorgeous, just imaging her took his breath away, but he wouldn't tolerate that kind of talk about his wife from any man. What's wrong with you? Frederick called after him. Man, you're no fun without a 3-drink minimum. Julius didn't acknowledge the last comment as he walked away, intent on leaving, but then came to a sudden halt. Why would his father bring Macy here? This was not his father's crowd. Did he come by mistake? Then again, Macy did have an eye for art, so seeing a Picasso might mean more to her. Still unsure, he threaded his way through the crowd searching for her. He had to be sure. It didn't take him long to find her. She stood out like a bright light in the dark. Her gown hugged her in all the right places. Its lace front showed more skin and highlighted her cleavage in a way the first dress she wore hadn't, though they had a similar silhouette. She laughed lightly at something his father said. Julius's breath caught in his throat as he watched her converse easily with his father, a man most found overbearing and terrifying. Yet fear was never something she felt towards the Dalair patriarch. He was her father's best friend and practically an uncle. How could he have forgotten that? Macy had always been comfortable around his father. She never acted nervous or flustered. Augustus was an excellent judge of character and he never ceased praising her. They had grown up together. She knew secrets about him no one else did. Yet Julius allowed himself to listen to rumors and twist the truth surrounding the woman who married him. Why did he let that happen? Could she find it in her heart to forgive him? Macy gave Augustus a peck on the cheek before excusing herself to freshen up and retreated to the bathroom. Fiddling with her hair in front of the sink, she stared at her reflection. It never got easier. In just over an hour she lost count of the jealous glares from the woman around her. It didn't matter what history she had with Augustus Dalair, just being at his side made her their target, never mind they didn't have the courage to approach him, let alone stand beside him. She didn't know which were worse, the jealous gazes of the women or the lecherous ones of the men. Macy felt like a piece of meat as they devoured her with their eyes. It was degrading and infuriating. If she were in normal clothes on the street they wouldn't even glance in her direction, especially if she was with the kids. People only saw what they wanted to see. When she felt composed again she stepped out to return to the party. Macy hadn't taken 2 steps when a hand reached out to grasp her arm. Turning to face the person hindering her she found a gentleman around her age. He had rich, black hair and eyes and would have been handsome enough if not for the hungry look in his gaze. She frowned and looked at his hand still gripping her arm, but he didn't remove it. Yes. Macy finally met his gaze again and spoke in a neutral tone. How much, gorgeous? Excuse me. Oh come on. You can't really be interesting in that flaccid old man. How much did he pay for you? I can rock your world faster than he ever could. Macy scowled. You have 3 seconds to let go of me or I'll knee your balls so hard you won't be rocking anyone's world ever again. Oh. Feisty. I like that. He dragged her closer until a hand grasped his wrist, squeezing it painfully. Wincing, Macy's solicitor turned to see Julius glaring daggers at him. His grip tightened until the other man groaned in pain. I believe the lady said to let go, Julius said, carefully controlling his voice. Fine. Okay, he finally released Macy, though Julius was slow to relax his own grip. Like father, like son, hey. Julius watched the other retreat, breathing deep to calm himself. After enduring Frederick's insensitivity, it had taken everything to keep from killing the man the moment he solicited her. Was everyone here an animal? He was doubly glad the kids were not in attendance. Thank you. Macy hesitantly touched his forearm to gain his attention as he continued to stare after the retreating figure with a murderous glare. Julius turned to face her. The look in his eyes immediately softened and made her fall silent. Guilt, fear, and concern swirled in his grey eyes as he studied her face, as if memorizing every freckle dusting her nose. Did he hurt you? What? And no. I'm fine. Macy fell silent as he picked up her hand and carefully studied the wrist the other man roughly grabbed. His fingers gently massaged it as he scrutinized it from every angle, looking for signs of bruising or tenderness. If she was hurt, he would hunt down the person responsible and make sure they never again saw the light of day. Julius, Macy said, gently touching his cheek with her fingertips of her other hand. His gaze snapped back to hers, surprised by her touch. I'm fine. Really? His gaze softened as his anger dissipated. A smile turned up the corners of his mouth. He reached up, pulling a stray hair out of her face and tucked it behind her ear, saying, If he had done anything to hurt you I would have. It's all right. I guess, money can't buy class. No. Some things are priceless, he chuckled. His thumb stroked her cheek. Involuntarily Macy leaned into the touch. Her eyes fluttered closed. Julius's smile broadened as his heart thudded in his ears, seeing her reaction to his touch. He leaned forward until his forehead rested against hers. I've been so worried about you. Macy hesitantly met his gaze. His face was so close, but she didn't try to put distance between them. Was it just because they had been apart for so long, or was she just that comfortable with him? I never stopped looking for you. You didn't. Pain flashed in his eyes at the thought. She didn't believe him, but he could hardly blame her after their last night together. But she deserved the truth, the whole truth. With a sigh, he said, that night I came home drunk and passed out. But the next morning, when I realized you were gone, really gone, I had Eric track your phone and when I found it in the trash, I panicked. I had him comb through every second of security footage we could access to find you. But you just disappeared. I never stopped looking. I had to find you. I had to tell you how sorry I was for what I put you through. Macy opened her mouth to say something but closed it again, not sure how she should respond. Should she be angry? Sad? Grateful? Happy? She always thought Julius would be glad she left without a fuss and moved on with his life. Now it seemed that wasn't so. Had he really been looking for her for 6 years? Why hadn't Augustus said anything? Perhaps if she asked about Julius first he might have, but she was too afraid to hear about his life without her or if he involved himself with someone new. If I could take that night back I would in a heartbeat, Julius said. Before she could answer he leaned forward, capturing her mouth with his. Macy stiffened in surprise but soon found herself relaxing as her desire for him stirred. His arm circled around her, pulling her close as he nipped her lower lip, begging for entry to deepen the kiss. Chapter 14. Catherine tossed money at the cab driver before sliding out. Straightening her cocktail dress, she pulled it down from where it rode up while she sat in the taxi. Satisfied, she sauntered inside past security without a care. They didn't attempt to stop her as she was a familiar figure with this particular crowd. Catherine. Here you are. Frederick greeted. He hugged her, pinching her cheek as he usually did. If there was one thing that was always consistent, it was his complete lack of decorum and boundaries. How are you? Fine, she smiled before dropping her voice. Where is he? I'm not sure. I lost track of him. Some help you are. Hey, I called you, didn't I? Frederick said in mock hurt. Is there something going on with you two? What is that supposed to mean? I don't know, he just seemed different tonight. Catherine scowled. She didn't want to admit things between her and Julius were not going well, or that he seemed to be losing interest in her. He had a lot to answer for once she found him. If she managed to gild him enough, she could finally secure his agreement on the wedding date. Once they were married, it didn't matter if he was distant to her. It didn't even matter if he decided to take on a mistress. She would be set for life. Ignoring Frederick's inquiry, she wandered through the crowd, but though she soon spotted Augustus, she did not see Julius. Avoiding the Dalair patriarch, Catherine continued her search. There would be time enough to confront him once she had Julius by her side. As difficult as Augustus was for others to handle, it was widely known he never went against his sons. When she didn't find him, her frustration only grew. Stomping a foot, she headed to the bathroom to freshen up and straighten her dress that kept riding up. Turning the corner, she came to a dead stop. In front of her, Julius stood with his arms wrapped around a woman in an evening gown. Their lips were locked in a passionate kiss. His hand fondled her, pulling her close so their bodies pressed together, leaving no space between. Catherine's face flushed as red as her rival's hair. Julius never touched her, let alone held her like that. The last time he kissed her was 2 years ago. Back then he was too drunk to even know what he was doing. Their makeout was sloppy and smelled heavily of whiskey. It had been her intention to drag him to her room and secure her place at his side until his brother intervened. March was nowhere to be seen tonight, and the smell of alcohol was noticeably absent. There was nothing obstructing Julius from his desires, and it was clear he wanted the redhead in his arms. Julius and Macy parted slowly, breathless as they stood together. Macy felt her face warm as she blushed, embarrassed by how her body responded to his. They had been apart 6 years, and yet it felt as if none had passed. Macy tried to date once or twice after she left him, but it always ended awkwardly. She never responded to any man the way she responded to him. Seeing her embarrassment, Julius smiled, gently stroking her cheek. Having her in his arms felt right, and she had to feel it too. It couldn't just be him. He wanted to ask her, but he couldn't form the words. What if she said no? Macy averted her gaze, suddenly feeling more and more awkward the longer they lingered, and said, "I should get back to Dad. He's probably wondering where I've gone." "He's a big boy," Julius whispered, leaning close before she pulled away. "Stay with me." "Julius, stay, Macy. I'll beg if that's what you want." "That's not necessary," Macy shook her head. "Stay." Macy hesitated. She felt safe in his arms. His caresses sent tingles down her spine. After 6 years of abstinence, her body longed for his touch, wanted his arms to hold her. But she couldn't make decisions based on carnal desires. She had to remember her babies. They were her life. Their happiness came first. What would they think once she told them about their father? "I should go. March and Rose have the kids right now. I should get them home to sleep." Julius was reluctant to let her go, but he knew better than to hold her against her will. He didn't want to push her too far, not when she was still so close. There was still time to make it all up to her. He would start tonight. "All right. I'll drive." "No, Dad, it's fine." Julius took out his phone, sending his father a quick text, "I'll take Macy home. Stay as long as you want. Let's go." Julius kissed her temple before leading her away. He kept his arm around her waist as he escorted her outside, handing his ticket to the valet. She shivered in the night chill. Without a word, he removed his coat and set it over her shoulders. Macy gave him a smile of gratitude even as his arm returned to her waist and he continued to hold her. He kissed the nape of her neck, reveling in her proximity. If he had his way, he would never let her go. The valet returned all too soon with his BMW, but he was glad to open the passenger door for her so she could escape the night air. Tipping the valet with a $100 bill, Julius circled to the driver's side and quickly joined her. Gripping her hand, he kissed it before driving off, leaving the party behind without a backward glance. As they drove off, Catherine stepped out of her hiding place. She panicked when Julius turned to escort the woman in his arms past her, but he hadn't even noticed her. Catherine trailed behind, watching as he led her rival outside. She shivered unconsciously when he removed his coat to keep the redhead warm. He never showed Catherine that level of concern or care. She stood fuming as he drove off. Who was that woman? Why did he care so much about her? What did she have to do to get him to treat her the same way? While Catherine stood fighting her frustrated tears, Augustus walked past. He didn't even look in her direction. Despite the fact he was leaving alone, he was satisfied. As he reached the sidewalk, Stephen pulled up and hurried to open the door. "Did everything go as planned?" Stephen asked as he took his place behind the wheel. "Indeed. Perhaps I should give my son more credit. He's not as hopeless as I feared." "Then it is safe to say Phase 3 was a success," Stephen smiled, pulling away from the curb. Augustus nodded with a smile. He was still struggling to understand his grandchildren's plan, but he wouldn't go against it. After successfully spending time with their absentee father, the twins decided to support him in his pursuit of their mother. With them on his side, Julius had a good chance as long as he didn't anything stupid. Finally he said, "Makes me wonder what they have planned for Phase 4. Catherine watched the Dalair patriarch leave without trying to detain him. Without Julius to support her, she would find no help from Augustus. The future she so carefully planned was unraveling quicker than she thought possible. If only she could have gotten Julius into her bed 2 years ago. She had been taking fertility treatments to help ensure a quick pregnancy. But that plan fell through, and Julius hadn't so much as touched her since. Now she caught him in the passionate embrace of another. She had to think of a way to get him back to her side quickly before it all fell apart. With new determination she flagged down a taxi. As she rode away she was unaware of the man quietly snapping photos of the entire encounter. Chapter 15. Julius pulled up in front of his brother's brownstone. Parking, he hurried to Macy's side holding the door open for her. Immediately slipping an arm around her he led her up to the front door. She blushed under his care but she didn't try to push him away. It was nice to be taken care of for once. A knock summoned the maid who smiled broadly at them. Edie had been March and Rose's maid for over 20 years and knew Macy quite well. She had high hopes for Julius's marriage before it came apart. Now that Macy had returned and brought their children, Edie's romantic heart was already envisioning them two together, though she was smart enough not to say so aloud. "Good evening, Mr. Dalair, Miss Grayson. The master and madam are this way with the kids." Edie led the way to the living room where Aria's delighted screams issued. Stepping inside they found the living room had been torn apart to make a blanket fort. March burst out from the center to collapse it as Aria and Caden struggled to escape. "Hurry, Caden! The boogeyman is coming!" Aria yelled as they ducked and crawled their way free. "Fee fi fo fum!" March called. "My goodness, March!" Rose admonished as she entered carrying refreshments and snacks on a tray. "You're worse than the children." Though she complained, Rose smiled. March had been the same way when Jude was young. Father and son played many such games, building and destroying countless forts. "Mommy!" Caden suddenly said, noticing the new arrivals. "Mommy!" Aria echoed as they rushed up to her, throwing their arms around her as she knelt to catch them. "There you are," Macy laughed. "Having fun with your uncle and aunt?" "Yes." March chuckled, giving Julius a curious look. Naturally he wondered what happened to their father and how Julius took his place. Despite his confusion, March stayed silent. It was enough Julius and Macy were in the same room and even seemed on good terms. It was definite progress. "Mr. Jules!" Aria exclaimed, holding out her arms in a clear gesture for him to pick her up. "Hey, Peanut!" Julius greeted with a smile and hoisted her up, holding her close as Aria hugged him tight. Aria giggled as he blew raspberries against her cheek before reciprocating. "Your cheeks aren't scratchy anymore," Aria laughed. "Well, thank you," Julius chuckled. The others watched the pair with a mixture of emotions. March and Rose were happy Julius finally had the opportunity to spend time with his children, though confused by the name Aria called him. Macy was conflicted. She was glad to see him accept his children but wondered if it would last. Though neither Aria nor Caden complained about the lack of a father, Macy felt it nonetheless. She also wondered why they addressed him if they had already met. When exactly had they been introduced? "Oh, have you met?" Macy asked. "We met at Grandpa's work," Aria said. "He taught us games on his computer." "Is that why you didn't get any work done?" March asked with a chuckle. Julius shot him a warning look. He felt no shame in the time he spent with his children. It still felt like a dream and nothing would destroy its magic. Macy studied at him, still looking conflicted. She couldn't help but wonder why he hadn't introduced himself as their father. "Is it time to go home, Mommy?" Caden asked. "Yes, it's time to say good night to your uncle and aunt. We have to be up early tomorrow." "Okay." Aria and Caden returned to their uncle and aunt, giving each a hug. "Good night, Auntie, Uncle." "Good night, angels," Rose cooed. "We'll see you again soon. And then we'll play more." March agreed, tickling Aria to elicit giggles. "Bye." Macy herded the twins out to the waiting car, followed by Julius. He saw his brother's curious gaze, but there wasn't time to explain how he and Macy met or why he was there instead of their father. They would talk later. Right now it was time to get his babies home and into their beds. He was glad he had driven the BMW instead of one of his sports cars, but he hesitated, realizing he didn't have the proper car seats for them. Macy assured him it would be fine for one ride. The drive was full of giggles as the twins related their night. They had dinner with their aunt and uncle and afterwards played several games. March had experience with toddlers thanks to raising Jude, and like Rose was eager to test his dormant skills. Julius found it a rather difficult drive, listening to the happy giggles. He never wanted it to end this way. Arya exclaimed once they arrived home. Taking his hand, she dragged Julius inside. "Come and see our room." Julius didn't fight as the twins dragged him along to their bedroom. Surprisingly, the walls were neutral colors, but the ceiling and walls were decorated with glow-in-the-dark stars. There was a bed on each side of the room along with a desk, dresser, and bookshelves. Each side was practically a mirror image with minor differences. Arya dragged him all the way to her bed and made him sit down before grabbing a book. "Buy best-selling books online. Will you read us a bedtime story?" "Arya," Macy wanted to protest, but Arya pressed the book into his hands. "One story, please." "I don't mind," Julius assured her as the kids snuggled on either side of him. The picture book Arya handed him was Make Way for Ducklings by Robert McCloskey. He remembered it from his own childhood and wondered if it was nostalgia that made his father include it. Arya and Caden leaned close as he opened it and read. Macy watched from the doorway, a soft yet conflicted look on her face. This was the scene she always dreamed of but never thought she would ever see. Only when the story was over did Arya and Caden finally consent to be changed into their pajamas. After they brushed their teeth, they were ready to be tucked in. For once they could be tucked in at the same time, with Macy helping Caden and Julius helping Arya. Kissing each goodnight, Macy pulled the door closed with final entreats for sweet dreams. Now alone with Julius, Macy wasn't sure what to do. Their kiss was still fresh in her mind. She would be lying if she said she didn't crave more. After 6 years apart, 6 years of taking care of kids, her body longed for what the kiss promised. She wanted him, wanted his hands on her, but she couldn't, could she? "Hey!" His arms surrounded her. Julius pulled her close as he bowed his head and nibbled at her ear. Macy shivered with pleasure. He was the only one to make her feel this way, safe, loved, wanted. She didn't want him to stop, but she couldn't let him continue. They were divorced. She wasn't supposed to feel this way about him anymore. "What are you thinking?" Julius asked, still holding her close, not wanting to let her go. "Why didn't you tell them who you are?" Macy asked. It had been bothering her since they called him Mr. Jules. "Because I didn't know if they knew who I was, and I didn't want to say anything you didn't want me to say." Macy bit her lip. He was trying to respect her boundaries, but it was clear he wanted to spend time with their children. He wanted to be their father, but he would settle for a friend or uncle if that was the line she drew. He wanted a relationship with them, and maybe, just maybe, her too. His fingers trailed up and down her back, eliciting tremors of pleasure. He nuzzled her neck, kissing her and working down to her shoulder. It wasn't just time with the children he craved. Her heart pounded in her ears. She could feel his desire barely held in check. "Julius," he cut her off with a lazy, slow kiss. Her body leaned into him, betraying the desire she tried to hold back. His hands roved her body, caressed her curves. Julius kissed the nape of her neck, slowly regaining his control. "I should go." Macy blinked, meeting his gaze. Her gaze was full of questions, conflicted and confused. He wanted nothing more than to keep kissing her until it was all clear, but he knew that would be too much for her. Macy was always a thinker. She needed time away from him to think without being muddled by his presence. I don't want to force you to do something you're not ready for. Julius sighed, resting his forehead against hers, but I want you to know walking out that door is going to be the most difficult thing I've ever done. He kissed her forehead before forcing himself to head to the door. Macy watched him go. Her heart was racing with his parting words. He really wanted to stay as much as she wanted him to. Could she let him leave like this? Julius. Wait. Macy hurried to the door just as he was stepping out. He turned as she reached him but remained silent, waiting for her to speak. Macy hesitated. She wanted to see him again, wanted to talk some more, and wanted the kids to know the father she had been too scared to tell them about. Tomorrow, I have to work. I was going to ask Rose, but, if you're not busy, would you like to watch the kids for me? A smile immediately graced his face. I'd love to. Okay. My appointment is at the Botanical Gardens in the Bronx, so meet us there around 11. Macy said. You can take them to lunch, the gardens, the zoo, or wherever, and we'll meet back up after I'm done. For dinner? He asked, hopeful. Sure. Macy nodded. He stepped forward, giving her a final kiss before stepping back. I'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow. Macy agreed, then watched him return his car and drive away with a mixture of emotions. She wasn't sure if she made the right decision, or if there even was a right decision. It might be wrong of her, but she was looking forward to tomorrow. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.